Hey guys. So I thought with all this corona stuff going around and all of us being in quarantine and being at home, which is a good thing, actually really quick note for all the people, all the young people my age who think that this corona has nothing to do with them, it's not going to make them sick, or if they do get sick they're going to be fine, and they're still going about, you know, doing their daily things, going to restaurants, bars, all that kind of stuff, and pretending like nothing is wrong. You're being stupid, because this corona thing has absolutely nothing to do with people like us. This coronavirus is about the other people you're affecting. I actually read something the other day that said people can be, you know, infected with this virus, people our age, and not even have symptoms. So for all you know, you could be going out and about having these symptoms or having this virus without knowing it, and give the infection to someone else who has a weaker immune system or who's much older than you. So the smart thing to do is stay at home as much as possible. Don't be an idiot. Like, this isn't about you. Stop being selfish and just stay at home as much as you can. So what this video is actually about is about tea, which is a huge passion of mine. If you don't know, I used to work at a tea store. Shout out to anyone watching who worked at Teavana with me. Teavana was a tea store, and we sold around 100 different teas, and all of them were loose leaf. So they didn't come in those packets, it was all just loose in big containers. And working there kind of opened my eyes to the tea world. Tea comes from the same plant, and I think this is something that not many people realize. They think, oh, black tea is a separate leaf, green tea is a separate leaf, white tea is a separate leaf, but no. It all comes from one plant, and it's called the Camellia synthesis. These different kinds of teas is the process, or how they're processed, basically. And this idea is similar with wine, for example. It all essentially comes from the grape, but the process is the aging, everything is different. Same with tea. I want to differentiate before I get into talking about teas. There are herbal teas as well, and I just want to say that herbal teas actually have no tea in them, and I have an example right here. Like, this is hemp tea, for example. It's just there's actually no tea leaf in here. So there's no caffeine. That's why most herbal teas are caffeine free, because they don't contain any tea leaves at all. They're just a mix of herbs, or just one single herb, like for example chamomile. It is just the chamomile flower. There's no actual tea in it, and same with this one, it's just the hemp flowers. So yeah, those are a completely different thing. They're not part of really the tea. They don't go through this kind of process that teas do. So they're its own thing. So the process deals with this thing called oxidation. The more oxidized the tea is, the darker the infusion, or the darker the color of the tea. So for white and green teas, they have the least amount of oxidation, so that's why they have the lightest color, as opposed to black tea, which has the darkest color. And then oolong tea, which I don't know if many people know about this kind of tea, it's kind of in the middle. It's like, it's not super dark, but it's also not very light either. So the process is a combination of plucking the tea, withering the tea, rolling the tea, then the oxidation, and then drying or frying the leaves. So it's quite a lengthy process. So the first things first is the plucking. And of course that just means picking the leaves from the best tea plants. They are withered and steamed, and this is a really important process. The leaves are laid out to dry, and this reduces the water content in them and makes the leaves more pliable so they can be rolled. And then for green tea, actually, they're not withered at all, they're actually steamed. And this helps the tea leaves remain green, because that's what gives green tea its really bright green color. So they're just steamed, they're not withered at all. And we have this process of rolling, and traditionally rolling is done by hand. So if you imagine a bunch of people sitting there with their hands, just with all these tea leaves, just hand rolling them. I mean, that's how tea has been made for years and years and years and years. But of course now we have machines that aid this process to make it quicker. This rolling helps break down the tea leaf structure, and it releases kind of the juices and oils from the leaf. And this provides a more uniform oxidation of the leaves, and this provides, or this gives tea its really distinctive flavors, this process, because you're kind of activating everything. The oxidation. So the oxidation, what this means is that it's exposed to the air, and it's a chemical process. It's not a full fermentation, but you're kind of semi-fermenting the leaves. And it's noticeable by, like I mentioned earlier, it's noticeable by looking at the color. So the more darker the leaves are, the more oxidized. The less dark it is, the less oxidized it is. Oxidation process, we have the drying and frying. And they're dried evenly, of course without burning. You don't want to burn your leaves. In large ovens, or they use drying machines as well. And they do this to stop the oxidation process so it doesn't do it anymore, or else the teas are constantly oxidizing. And they kind of lock in the flavor as well. I'm going to talk about how to brew your tea, because I think it's good to know the background and where tea comes from, but I think brewing is what is most important to us, because I know there are a lot of tea drinkers, and I see so many people making tea the wrong way. So I really hope that me being able to teach you guys how to make it properly will aid you in your process of having good tea. For most black teas, it's 1 teaspoon. So I'm going to be talking about using loose leaf tea, but you can use packed tea as well. I'm not saying you have to use loose leaf tea. You want 1 teaspoon per cup. It's going to be 100 degrees Celsius. So about boiling basically. And you're going to steep it for about 2 to 4 minutes. Now this depends on how strong you want it. For me, I think about 3 minutes is good. Then green tea. Green tea is really important because this is the tea that I see people messing up the most. They put boiling water and then they pour it over the green tea, and what happens is the taste gets so bitter. And actually, before I started working at Teavana, I hated green tea. It tasted disgusting to me. I thought it was bitter, too earthy, and just revolting, to be honest. And then I realized I was just making it wrong. So you're gonna want 1 teaspoon per cup and about 70 to 80 degrees. You can easily just use I use a meat thermometer, and I just put it in the water to get the temperature. And then you only want to steep, now this is important as well, you only want to steep it for 1 to 3 minutes. My sweet spot is about 2 minutes, and I wouldn't steep it over that. It's not supposed to be bitter. It's going to be a nice slight earthy taste, but you're not going to get any of that like sour, astringent kind of taste in your mouth, because green tea is not supposed to taste like that. Don't just leave your bag in there and forget about it, because that's also going to ruin the flavor of the tea. The next thing I'm going to talk about is matcha, and matcha is near and dear to my heart. Now matcha is green tea, but basically they come in containers like this. Well, they sell them in different ways as well. This one I brought from the US. So matcha is basically green tea leaves that are stone ground into a really, really fine powder. I don't know if I can show in the video very well, but it's very, very fine, like a powder. And so with this, you're going to be making a paste and then pouring hot water on it. And what's different about it is that when you're just steeping the green tea leaves, you're not ingesting the whole leaf. But with matcha, you're basically consuming the whole leaf. So it's higher in caffeine, and there are even more health benefits to matcha as well. And it has a much nuttier, earthier flavor that I love so much. Of course, you don't have to have any of these things, but traditionally this is called a chawan. I'm probably butchering that name. I'll put the name somewhere here on the screen. I got this for Christmas actually. I've wanted one for a while, and this is a traditional tea bowl that they use in Japan. And for matcha, actually, they don't pour it into a cup. They make it in this bowl, and then they would pass it around and all drink from the same bowl. I may be wrong, but that's what I remember. So I just make my matcha in here. I still pour it into my cup, but I make it in here. Then this is a matcha whisk. This is really important, I think, when making matcha. You can use a blender, but if you don't have this, I feel like it's hard to get all the clumps out when you're sifting the powder. because you put the matcha in here and then you add a little bit of cold water and you whisk it in a W motion and kind of in a circular motion to get, you want to get any clumps out. So this is kind of really important. It's not that expensive and it lasts a while. You just rinse it off and it dries. And then this thing is completely not essential at all, but I wanted the whole set. This is called a shash. This is called a shashaku. Again, maybe butchering that. I'm gonna put it on the screen somewhere here. This is a tea scoop, specifically for matcha. You don't need this, you could use a teaspoon, doesn't matter. But this is the authentic way that they would scoop matcha. So I had that as well. So for matcha, it's actually slightly cooler. The range is about 60 to 80 degrees. You're gonna put about 1 teaspoon or 2 scoops of this per cup, or slightly more depending on how strong you want it. And yeah, you don't need to steep it, you just need to whisk it, and then just pour the hot water on top and you're good to go. Next tea is oolong tea. So oolong is kind of the flavor is kind of a mixture of a black tea and a green tea. It's actually really incredible. 1 to 2 teaspoons for this one, depending how generous you're feeling. 90 degrees, so just under boiling, and then about 1 to 3 minutes. For me, 3 minutes is kind of my sweet spot. Then we have white tea. Now white tea is extremely delicate, as well as like green tea. So you're gonna want about 2 teaspoons because it is very delicate and 70 to 80 degrees, and you only wanna steep it just like green tea for about 1 to 3 minutes. For me, 2 minutes is kind of my preference. We have pu'er. It's similar to a black tea, but it has a much nuttier, more earthy flavor compared to black tea that's just more, not coffee-like, but in a similar flavor profile as that, very dark, almost chocolatey. About 1 teaspoon, 90 degrees, again, right under the boiling point, in about 2 to 5 minutes. I think 3 minutes is a good amount. That's what I do. Now I have just a couple of tips for you guys. Now I know many people use a little tea scooper thing to steep the tea, like a little clamp, and the problem with those, and I understand if you don't have access to anything else, but the tea leaves, if you're using loose leaf tea, they don't have room to expand, and so they're getting trapped up in there. You pour the water and they're trying to expand, but they can't get out, so you're basically losing a lot of flavor, which you don't want. I have this thing, I don't know if they sell them in Estonia, I'm not sure. This is one that I had in Tivana when I was working. We sold these. I actually broke mine, and then my mom, they actually closed Tivana, so Tivana doesn't exist anymore, so I was really sad. But my mom found this at a thrift store, brand new, not touched, so I'm able to get it back again. But as you see, you put the tea leaves in here, and you pour the hot water in here, and it has so much space to it. The tea leaves have so much space to expand. And then you just set it on a cup under here, and it comes out and leaves the tea leaves in here. So this is a really cool thing. If you don't have that, I would just recommend making sure you have a steeper that's really big, or even just putting the leaves straight into the water and then just straining the tea leaves out, because you really want them to fully bloom, because you're gonna lose a lot of flavor if they're like trapped up in there. The main tip is also to don't over steep your tea. Don't just put it in and forget about it, because it's gonna ruin your tea experience, and we don't want to ruin our tea experience, do we? So just make sure to focus on the temperature, don't burn it. With black tea you can be a little forgiving about putting boiling water, but just don't over steep your tea and try to give them space to flourish. Yeah, go make yourself a cup of tea.